Hi, my name is Jorden Sanders, and I was the 2024 Cheryl A Memorial Fellowship recipient. My research emphasis is in 19th-century African American literature, with a particular focus in the way that literature circulated in the ears of the public. So I think about the way texts were read aloud, remembered, as a kind of oratory practice. My plans after graduation are to go into academia and to be a professor of African American literature. Being a recipient was such an honor. I met Cheryl the year I came into the program, but unfortunately she passed right before I was able to take any of her classes. And so I distinctly felt the absence, of her and her work. And so it was an honor to think of my own work as continuing in her tradition. The fellowship actually allowed me to do archival research at Fisk University, which ended up being absolutely necessary for my final chapter of my dissertation. I had read so many of her texts just as part of study, and so I was kind of awestruck. I imagine that would be how people who are musicians would feel if they, met Beyonce or something. I just kind of sat there and grinned really big. The first time I read her book, Worrying the Line, I was impressed. Her prose is so clear and almost musical, but I also felt like it probably wasn't for me. A lot of her work thought about those 20th century texts, and my work is the century back. And so I knew that I wanted to be the kind of scholar that she was. I wanted my work to feel urgent and accessible to my readers, but I wasn't immediately sure that I would use her work in my own research. Obviously, that has changed. My dissertation would not happen without her scholarship. Most immediately, as I said before, the fellowship allowed me to take a research trip to Fisk University to visit their archives, to look at the manuscripts and personal papers of Pauline Elizabeth Hopkins. And so quite literally, chapter 4 of my dissertation would not have happened if I were not able to take that time away and to be at Fisk. Those kinds of trips can be an extraordinary pressure on graduate students. And so to have that trip funded actually meant quite literally the completion of my dissertation. My dissertation is titled Retuning the World: Blackness, Being, and the Acoustics of African American Literary Culture to 1905. And so what was really difficult at the beginning of my project was figuring out how to talk about print matter as sound in the 19th century. So often for 20th century scholars, they have recordings and they have, the kind of technology that captures sound, but I actually needed language for what it means to read sound on the page. And that's what Worrying the Line actually gave me. Cheryl Wall does a reading where she talks about literally like the pitch of language. And so to use that, to find a way, an example at least, of what it means to use sound and musical language for the words on the page would not have been something I would have come up with on my own. But thankfully, we had the work of Cheryl Wall, who's a genius. And so that helped me out tremendously. That language becomes kind of the foundational framework for how I even approach the text that I read in my dissertation. I think people should give to the fellowship because it has very material benefits for students. Like I said, my own work would not have happened if I were not able to kind of take those research trips, especially in the summer when most graduate students who are at that stage are not funded during the summer. So to have a source of income that allows you to visit archives, to make arrangements. I mean, even simple things like when I went to the archive at Fisk, I had to pay for copies. These are kinds of expenses that you don't necessarily budget for in the already very limited budget that is graduate study. So first I would say, please help, because you are quite literally making the difference in someone's scholarship. But what I think makes the Cheryl Wall Fellowship distinctive is because there is I don't know the word I would use is a kind of like sacredness, a kind of holiness to placing yourself in her legacy. There's a a wonderful burden that comes from knowing that your work should reflect not only her legacy, but like her investments, right? I decided to use the money to go to Fisk because it was Black women's work, it was music, it was sound, and the ability to build a community with other scholars who share those investments just by being able to kind of locate yourself in relationship to the legacy and the memory of Cheryl Wall is something that is amazing.